Hey everyone, welcome back to Staying Connected, a podcast where I talk to people about their stories with vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And today I have Sarah with me who's going to tell her about her son's story with VEDS. Hey Sarah.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Doing all right.
So you have a 5-year-old son. Tell me about him.
I have a 5-year-old son whose name is Andrew, and he was diagnosed a little over 3 years ago with vascular Ehlers-Danlos.
And how did you guys get to that diagnosis at such a young age?
When I was pregnant with him, he, we had our ultrasound, to find out, whether or not they're a boy or a girl. And during that ultrasound, they discovered that he had clubbed feet. And so we knew that before he was even born. And we got that corrected. He had a series of casts starting from when he was about 2 weeks old, that culminated in a tendon lengthening surgery when he was 2 months old
Wow.
for his Achilles tendons. And and then he had to wear, I think it's a Ponseti braces, for I think the first 2 years of his life or so. The first 3 months it was all the time, and then he just had to wear them at night to keep his feet from relapsing into clubbed feet again.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had clubbed feet, which is an indicator, which is a symptom or a comorbidity. I guess it's a comorbidity
Mm-hmm.
of vascular EDS, which we did not know at the time. That was not even on our radar. Um, but when he was a baby, even when he was 2 weeks old, he had bruising. He would bruise little teeny tiny bruises all over his body. It looked almost like somebody was pinching him. They were so small, and they were like the size of maybe the tip of a pencil eraser.
Mm-hmm.
And our first pediatrician, I think he noted that in his doctor's notes that he had a lot of bruising, and but he was really concerned about Andrew's eyes and how they still are really big eyes. And he was concerned that maybe they weren't closing all the way, that the eyelids were not covering the entire eye. And so he referred us to an ophthalmologist to get that tested. And the ophthalmologist said that that was fine, but Andrew sleeps with his eyes half open, which is also another vascular EDS characteristic. Um, but then I used to work in the Department of Neonatology at the University of Utah, and we found through an interesting series of coincidences that one of the fellows that I used to work with in the neonatology department, he changed his what's it called?
Specialty?
His Yeah, there you go. His specialty from a neonatologist to a pediatrician. And so I decided to switch to his practice because I actually knew him in a professional manner. I taught him his lab skills. Um, so like how to do DNA sequencing and stuff like that. And so he saw Andrew, and he saw all the bruising that was on Andrew, and he said, "This is not right, and we need to figure out what's going on, because I know that you don't abuse your children physically, but when he gets to the age," and he was about 18 months at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, when he gets to the age of preschool or school and other care providers, teachers and teachers' aides and stuff like that see him and they see all of these bruises, they're going to start raising questions, and we need to have an answer. Um, so he referred us to hematology because we figured, with the bruising, maybe it was hemophilia or, something, a bleeding disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And so they ran some tests, which if you ever have to have a blood draw for any, like for a baby, it's one of the worst experiences ever,
Oh,
honestly, because they don't understand what's going on and it hurts and they just want it to stop. And
yeah.
you have to hold them. um, but hematology came back, all of his blood looked just fine. So we were back to the drawing board because there's still a problem. And so then my pediatrician called me up one evening and he said he thought it was a type of Ehlers-Danlos and that we needed to be referred to a geneticist. But the geneticist at the University of Utah, the wait time to even get on the schedule was 18 months to 2 years out.
Wow.
And yeah, and we figured that was good enough because we'd at least have a diagnosis before he was in kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, so back to Andrew's clubbed feet, we went in for a routine checkup at Shriners Hospital. And a resident was looking at his feet, and I was telling this resident that Andrew was suspected of having a type of Ehlers-Danlos, and she said, but that the genetics wait was as long as it was, it could be 2 years before we get a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but, and so I guess what she had said was she recommended getting an echo of his heart in the meantime so that we would have that in Andrew's file when it came time to see the geneticist. And so I told our pediatrician that, and he thought that was a really good idea. And so he referred us to a cardiologist at the University of Utah for an echo. And they found that his aortic root was dilated. So as the aorta is coming out of the heart, it was just a little bit wider than is normal.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, they referred us to a genetic cardiologist, which I didn't even know was a specialty. And so he saw Andrew and he saw his, he checked his facial features. I'm sure he did the Beighton score, but I didn't know what it was at the time because I chose not to go to Dr. Google and find things or, look things up because I did start doing that at one point and it terrified me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided to put it down. And so we did the genetic testing and it came back. I think he was tested for a few different types of EDS, and I think he was tested for maybe a few different types of other connective tissue conditions. And it came back that he has a mutation that causes vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And instead of taking 2 years to get diagnosed, it was over the course of 2 months.
Wow.
So, yeah, so that resident at Shriners really, really helped out, and she found some kind of back door for us. And I kind of felt like we went through this rabbit hole that nobody knew about, And, yeah.
So nobody else in your family has VEDS?
As far as we know, nobody else has VEDS. We are working on making sure that that's the case. I was tested and I am negative for it. My father passed away a week after I graduated from high school from a heart attack, and it was really sudden. And so that was a little concerning to me, and I just wanted to make sure that it was, while we didn't really suspect it because I don't have any of the other symptoms that my son had or has. I don't know why I'm using past tense, but the symptoms that my son has, I don't really have those, and neither does my husband. And so our geneticists didn't really feel like we needed to be tested, but they would test us if we wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And I chose to be tested, and my husband, we're in the process of getting him tested too.
So, how did you feel when you were going through this, and how did you feel when you finally got the diagnosis 2 months later?
I felt, I don't know, ever since Andrew was born, he has 2 older siblings, so he wasn't my first child, and I've been through having children, before, and by your 3rd child, you kind of know what to expect, what milestones there are, and stuff like that. And I just felt like every time we went to the doctor's office, there was something else that was concerning about him. And we'd resolve one issue, and then the next issue would come up. And it just, I think that, honestly, it kind of helped while going through that waiting process, because I think he was a month after his 2nd birthday when he got diagnosed. And I had learned at that point in time to just put something in a box and put it away and continue, because there were just so many different things that we were concerned about for him, from his eyes and his feet, and he had a clogged eye duct at one point, and just there was always something to be worried about with him. And I could just sit there and be a basket case and get nothing done, or I needed to learn how to, yes, still be concerned about these things, but I need to still function. I still need to make dinner for my family. I still need to take them to swim lessons. I still need to do all of these things. I still need to function. Mm-hmm. And so I guess that's kind of, I put it in a box and I put it away. Maybe that's not healthy, but it helped me to function. And I don't know. I'm not sure that I was surprised when he came back with that diagnosis, because the little that I had looked up online, it matched him pretty well. And then when we got the diagnosis, everything else that seemed to have nothing to do with each other, his feet, his eyes, his skin, his bruises, it all, even though they're completely different areas of his body, and completely different concerns, it all was explained by one condition. It all had the same answer. Mm-hmm. And then after he was diagnosed, I think I did okay with it. I don't know. There's still periods of time where there's grief. I didn't join any support groups because I didn't even think to look for any until about 6 months after he was diagnosed. And it was actually from a friend that she was her kids went to swim lessons with my kids. And about the time that Andrew was diagnosed, I told her what he had, and she actually was the first person who actually knew what I was talking about, because she was suspected of having the hypermobile type of EDS, and she's like, "Oh, I know what you're talking about." So that was amazing. And then like a few months down the road after that, she said, "I'm part of this local EDS group." and they're talking about a new geneticist at the University of Utah and stuff like that. And so I joined that group, and at that point in time, I believe I was probably the only person that had a relative or anybody that had vascular Ehlers-Danlos in the local Utah group.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody pointed me to the vascular Facebook group, and from there I've made a lot of friends. But joining those groups, it was a shock again to the system because it became just so much more real. And I know you're in the Facebook group.
Yeah, that was wild.
It's really serious, and it's really depressing, and it's in your face.
Yeah.
That this is the worst. But at the same time, I've made some really, really good friends.
Yeah, I remember when I joined that Facebook group, it was like I switched from being in a Facebook group that was just broad Ehlers-Danlos syndrome to being pulled into that vascular group. And all of a sudden, everything that I would see switched from dislocations and POTS to ruptures and bowel complications. And it was just like people who understand what I'm worried about.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of a slap to the face too, or at least I felt that way. So,
I always warn people before I add them to the group now, because I'm like,
yeah,
it's a really awesome group of people, and you will not feel as connected to somebody as you can in that group, because it is full of people who understand what you're going through, but it is really difficult at sometimes.
It's really true, and we've lost a lot of people lately, and some of them I didn't know really well, but there's one in particular that I did know, or I felt like I knew that person pretty well, and it's really hard. And last April, I went to the VEDS family conference in Texas, and it was just amazing going there and seeing all of those families that, people that actually had the same condition that my son has, and loved ones that were there, supporting and they're people that are from this Facebook group too. And you look at them, it was like a family reunion, honestly, because they're people that you've never met, but you have this thing in common, and it was just, there's so many emotions because you have these answers. You have an answer, which is amazing, but at the same time it's devastating, and all of these people have the same answer, and it's good to be together, but at the same time, the fact that you're even, like, this is even a thing it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I remember when I was at the VEDS collaborative meeting in July last year. There was a family day with a bunch of people, and it was just like, you just know.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, and I mean, that's really, and it feels like your family, at least it did for me. And it's just, I think it's the weirdest feeling because you don't really know these people, but you do still feel this connection that just, you have them, they've got your back, and you love them. So, I don't know. It's an amazing feeling, and I hope nobody has to deal with that, because it means that you're dealing with something hard and awful, but at the same time it's such a beautiful feeling too. So I don't know. There really are no words as far as that goes. But yeah, I really wanted to make it to that collaborative meeting, and I wasn't able to. So I'm hoping this year I'll
Yeah,
be able
hopefully
to
this
make
year.
it.
So tell me about Andrew now. Is there anything that you don't let him do or things that he avoids?
Um, well, we don't, I haven't ever signed him up for soccer because it's really hard to know how rough kids are going to get. Even 5-year-olds, how rough they're going to get on the field and stuff like that. He does swim lessons, but I have told his swim instructors that he can't practice diving
Mm-hmm.
because when you dive, I don't know, when you learn how to dive, there's lots of belly flops. And since there's a risk of bowel rupture for VEDS patients, I don't want to put extra strain on that, have an extra impact or extra impacts from diving on his tummy.
Mm-hmm.
Or even honestly on his chest too, because you can have pneumothoraxes too, collapsed lungs. I'm trying to think how else we limit him. It's
Was
really hard because he's not in kindergarten yet, so there's not a lot of sports that he's wanting to do.
mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I kind of feel like we cross that bridge when we get to it.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good way to handle it. So how about with your other two kids? Do they know?
yeah, and I don't know how much they comprehend. I don't know how much Andrew comprehends, but sometimes I think he does. He knows that he's different. The other two, we do talk to them. My kids do roughhouse, not that I approve of that, but sometimes I have two boys,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes that's just how boys are, and you can't, I don't know. You can't split them apart sometimes and stuff. So even though I frown on it and I don't let it happen that much, it still happens. And I've tried to explain to my older child that you have to be really careful with him because he is so much more fragile. And I think they try, but a lot of times they forget, and nothing really bad has happened yet. So I don't know, and I think this is probably the case for our whole family, for my husband and for me as well, that since nothing really bad has happened, we maybe are in kind of a little bit of a false sense of security, and it's okay because nothing's happened, and he can handle this. But that's not necessarily true. But it's hard to be on alert all the time too.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I
Maybe
imagine you
that's
want to
not
let him be a
helpful.
kid too.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's really hard sometimes to strike a balance of, because I think it's okay. You gotta live your life. You can't be in a bubble all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want him to sit there and be like, oh, I wasn't allowed to do all of these things. My mom would only let me sit at home and play video games, which honestly he would be happy with. but 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 I don't want him to look back on his childhood and be like, man, I had a really boring childhood. My brother and sister, they went out and they played with friends and they went sledding and they did all of these things, and I wasn't allowed to leave the house.
Mm-hmm.
And Andrew does go sledding with his friends, or not his friends, but with us. We do take him sledding. Um, and if he goes down a sled by himself, he goes down on a smaller hill than everybody else. And the kids in our neighborhood, they like to make sled runs where they've they've made jumps so the sled gets some air and stuff like that. And we're like, no jumps. You're not allowed to do jumps. So I guess we do modify, but he still gets to sled because, I mean, we live in Utah, and if you can't go sledding as a kid, like, that's not cool. You know? And I grew up in Georgia, so I never got a chance to go sledding. So like, you've got to go sledding, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. So I think we do let our kids know. I think it's almost kind of like with sex ed kind of thing. You gotta tailor it to the age. You're not gonna tell your 5-year-old all the things about how babies are made. You know, you're gonna tell them the basics of what they need to know. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. So, what have you told him?
For his condition,
Yeah.
we've told him that he gets hurt a lot more easily than other people do, and so he has to be more careful. And he knows that himself. There was a period of time where he was getting hurt. He was getting stitches about every 6 months. And it's been about 2 years now, but like, there were some times where he'd hit his head and he'd automatically reach up to touch his head, and he'd say, "Oh, look, Mom, I'm okay, no blood." You know, and what kind of kid does that? But his head, I mean, his skull, the skin on his skull is so thin
Mm-hmm.
that he just bumps it against a chair or a wall because he's a 5-year-old, you know, or he was a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old, and that happens. And where it wouldn't do any damage to my other children, it busts open his skin.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's so thin. And he knows this. I think he knows, and he recognizes it because he's been in his body for the last 5 years. He knows that. I don't think he knows to the extent. But I don't think there's any reason to talk to him about it now, because I don't want him to have to worry about that.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that he knows that he's different and that he has to be more careful.
That's hard for a 5-year-old.
It's really hard. So, shortly after he was diagnosed, he was standing on a chair on our balcony, and he went to lean over on the balcony. His feet left the chair and he was just leaning over the balcony. And he does things like that. And my husband jokes that he's not gonna die from VEDS. He's gonna go out in a flame of fire. You know? He's gonna have some kind of accidental death. You don't gotta worry about this condition.
It's so funny. It's something that really shouldn't be funny, but it's so funny.
Oh, it is. I don't know. You have to have that morbid sense of humor, I think, and that's kind of how our family deals with it. Is
Mm-hmm.
we find the humor in places where maybe it shouldn't be humorous. So.
I feel like that's true for a lot of people I've talked to with this.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Well, I mean, if you don't laugh, you cry, right?
Yeah. And it's okay to cry too.
Yeah.
But I do find the morbid humor in things a lot.
So,
well, is there anything else that you wanted to share with the listeners? Did I miss anything?
No, I don't think you missed anything. I think you had said in your last podcast, you're a big proponent about getting the genetic testing,
Hmm.
and I wanted to say that I think that's really, really important too. So I think that's about it.
It's super important. I know it was so hard to get that
Yeah,
genetic test. It's so hard to get in to see a geneticist, and then the geneticist doesn't always know what
yeah,
they're doing, and then it's just so hard to get that
but
test.
but I think it's really important to get that differential test because vascular EDS it can have the same similar symptoms as Louis Dietz or Marfan's. Um, I'm sure there may be other conditions or other connective tissue things that it can be like too. And I know for Loeys Dietz and for vascular EDS, they have similar things where with Louis Dietz, you should have surgery and it would save your life. But if you had that same surgery and you have VEDS, it could kill you. And then it's vice versa. If you have Louis Dietz and you don't have the surgery because they think you have vascular EDS, not having that surgery can kill you. And so that's one thing that I really think is important. And that's one thing in my local community I'm very vocal about. And even in the vascular Facebook group, because there are some people out there that haven't gotten the genetic testing done.
Hmm.
And I think it's really important that you do that so that you know exactly what you have so that the doctors can take the right precautions and know exactly what they're dealing with and know what the right course of action is to go.
Yeah.
So I think knowing as much as you possibly can about your condition is what's important. And I think even understanding a little bit of the genetics, like because there really are, you kind of, in the VEDS community with the diagnosis, you fall into like there's really kind of three different parts or types of mutations. And I think knowing which type of mutation you have within VEDS is also important because there are different outcomes that are more likely to happen in one type versus the other type. But that's kind of my soapbox, and I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So what you're talking about is the substitution mutation, where the glycine that holds the collagen 3
Yeah,
together is substituted with a different amino acid, versus like a haploinsufficiency, where you make a normal type of
yeah,
collagen but half of it.
yes.
And then there's
And
the
then
splicing
there's,
mutation.
yeah, where you have a whole section of coding DNA taken out so that the the collagen that's made is shorter than the other types or the normal collagen. It's shorter than the normal collagen.
Mm.
So,
So yeah, there is some
yeah,
variation in outcomes there.
yeah,
And Dr. Byers has a really good video on it.
yeah.
So,
And I don't know, I'm really interested in future research, and I am suspicious that there's more differences than what we know today between those three different types.
oh, I'm sure. There's
So
just so much without a natural history study that we don't know yet.
it's true, and I just really want it done. So,
Me too.
because I need to know this information yesterday.
Yeah, I feel ya. So I'll make sure to put a link to that video by Dr. Byers in this description of the
Awesome.
podcast for people.
Yep.
Cool. Well,
So
thank you for
I think
talking
that's
with me
everything.
today.
Yeah. Thanks for interviewing me.
And hopefully we'll get to connect sometime in the future in person,
I
wherever that may
hope
be.
so. Well, I think we have a couple opportunities coming up soon. So
Yep. Looking forward to
so
it.
yeah. It'll be fun.
All right, everyone. Thank you again for listening. This was Sarah telling her story with vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome with her son Andrew. And this is Katie, your host. If you want to subscribe to this podcast, I have more episodes coming out on the last Sunday of every month. And for now, that's the frequency that I can handle. But hopefully in the future, there will be more. So stay tuned, and we'll talk to you soon.